Kyrie to Chronicles of Ancient Greece, the podcast that delves deep into the fascinating history, myths, and legacies of the ancient Greek world. This is episode 14, What's in the Box? Okay, so this is where we are. The podcast is back to a regular schedule, and by regular, I mean weekly, not tri-monthly. The Greeks have founded the universe, and I see a nice fire crackling away up on Mount Olympus. On Earth, though, it's mighty cold and dark and oh, what's that, Prometheus? You're on it? Okay, I hope there are no long-lasting consequences for everyone involved. Fingers crossed. Now, to understand the story of Prometheus and Pandora, but we'll get to her, we need to understand the person who wrote about it. At least the most commonly known version, Hesiod. Now, Hesiod is no Homer. He's not as interested in heroic narratives and more interested in genealogies, practical advice, and moral housekeeping. Scholars traditionally place him in the late 8th or early 7th century BC. So early archaic Greece, the period where poetry was still an oral art, but scribes were beginning to write stuff down. Think of Hesiod as the farmer poet who had a lot of free time on his hand while waiting for better weather and just decided to explain why the world is the way that it is. Now, we've touched on it last time, but for our purposes, Hesiod wrote two short and very different works that matter for today. First up is the Theogony, a systematic genealogy of the gods. It's basically a list that explains who begat whom and who now runs the cosmic neighborhood. We drew on that heavily for last week's episode. Second, and very important for today, is the Works and Days, a mix of practical farming advice and moral lesson. This is where Hesiod tells the story of Prometheus, Zeus, and Pandora as an explanation for why life is hard for humans. Works and Days is famously practical. It offers calendar advice, tips for seed planting, and homilies on fairness. The Prometheus story sits inside that didactic project as a moral explanation for labor and scarcity. Hesiod tells his tale to someone who has to get up at dawn and mend fences. The myth answers a farmer's question: why is the world set up so that I have to toil? The answer Hesiod provides is moral and legalistic, because someone cheated the contract and the superior had to respond by enforcing discipline. Now, if we get into the narrative, Prometheus shows up in these genealogies as a son of the titan Iapetus, with Epimetheus, Atlas, and Menevicius as his siblings. The names are really not subtle because Prometheus literally means forethought, so the planner, the one who thinks ahead. Epimetheus is the afterthought, the one who acts first and regrets later. Atlas is the one who gets to carry the world on his shoulders as punishment. And Menevicius is often associated with rashness or violent anger, basically another poor fit for sensible decision-making. If we go by his name, Prometheus is therefore a figure whose identity is encoded in his name. He plans, he calculates, he anticipates. That label explains why he's the one who sees human potential and either pities it or wants to empower it, depending on your source and your mood. But to figure out what kind of person Prometheus actually is, we can look at a tale about the feast at Mycenae, a mythical meeting where gods and mortals arrange how sacrifices will be divided going forward. Prometheus is acting for humanity here. He's on their side. At the feast, Prometheus divides a recently slaughtered ox into two piles. One pile contains the good meat, the part mortals would actually like to eat. But it is hidden inside the ox's unappetizing stomach and hide. The other pile is the bones, but these bones are extravagantly covered with glistening fat, rendered to look like the choicest portion. Prometheus then offers Zeus the choice of which portions the gods should receive as their sacrifice forevermore. Zeus obviously selects the fat glazed bones. In Hesiod's account, he does this, is then obviously annoyed when he finds out, and very consequentially, removes fire from humankind or otherwise forbids them access to it. Now, to a modern ear, this episode sounds like Prometheus was just messing with Zeus for the hell of it. To a Bronze or Iron Age Greek person, however, it's an etiological myth, a story meant to explain why Greeks perform sacrifice the way that they do. Anthropologically speaking, the ritual practice the myth explains looks like this. When Greeks slaughtered an animal for sacrifice, certain portions, notably the fatty parts, were burned on the altar. These portions then ascended to the gods as smoke, which basically was the sacrifice the gods received as their meal. The remainder, the meat, was consumed by the community of mortals as a feast. So what the myth basically does is explain and justify a social arrangement. The gods receive the smoke, the humans receive the meat. In Hesiod's scheme, Prometheus rigs the division so humans end up with the flesh and the gods with the bones and fat. An arrangement that benefits mortals materially, because they get the food, but definitely offends Zeus's sense of honor and prerogative. But please be aware of the irony, because the gods literally get the less nutritious portion on the table, but they get the symbolic premium, the sacrificial smoke, and, crucially, the authority and the ritual prestige that comes with having something sacrificed to you. Mythically, however, Zeus's anger is not just that he received bones, it's that the entire social contract of who gets what was rearranged by a mortal agent. Well, technically a titan siding with mortals. And Zeus being angry about symbolic status is a very, very Greek problem. We'll get to that. One subtlety that lovers of textual nuance will enjoy is that Hesiod suggests that Zeus is not actually deceived, but rather that he knows full well which pile contains what, and chooses the bones deliberately to just invent an excuse to punish humans later. Yeah, Zeus is a fun guy. This interpretation completely reframes the scene, because in this reading, Prometheus's trick is not a successful theft, but so much as a courtroom performance that gives Zeus the moral pretext to act. In other words, the trick provides scapegoat economics for Zeus's punishment. Plus, it absolutely sounds like something Zeus would do. So, was Prometheus the clever trickster who outwitted the king? Or the clever trickster who set up a test and thereby allowed the king to stage a moral drama? Both answers were available to ancient audiences, and Hesiod does enjoy the ambiguity because the trick is morally ambivalent, which suits his overall point. Human advantage comes at a cost.
Prometheus's trick, whether successful deception or necessary provocation, precipitates the rest of the plot. Zeus retaliates by denying humans fire, basically the decisive technological resource of the time, and later by introducing Pandora to humanity as the instrument of their suffering. The sacrificial scam is thus the hinge. It explains not only seating at the cosmic banquet, but also the cascade of punishments and compensations that define the human condition in Hesiod's moral cosmos. Prometheus, though, decides that while Zeus punishing humans is apparently fine, the withholding of fire is unacceptable. So he takes matters into his own hands. How does he do it? Well, according to Hesiod, Prometheus conceals fire in a hollow fennel stalk, or in some tellings, a hollow reed, and carries it back to Earth. The reed becomes a torch, fire returns to humans. Zeus is stark raving mad. Now, please also remember that this is pretty much a crazy image. There are no thunderbolts or dramatic chariot chases, but rather a titan crouched over embers, stuffing them into a vegetable and then slinking away. It's both heroic and oddly practical because the myth also preserves a real life method of actually transporting embers, and it makes the theft feel like an achievement of craft, not a mere supernatural burglary.
Now, it may be easy to joke about the reed, like we should because it's funny, but the theft's consequences are enormous. In pre-industrial societies, fire is not only warmth and light, it is core technology. Through fire, food becomes digestible, calories become more accessible, diets improve. That changes health and social patterns and reliably improves festival behavior. In metallurgy, bronze and then later iron need heat for smelting and working metals. Without fire, you're stuck with stone tools and despair. With fire, you get plows, swords, nails, and the occasional regrettable empire. Fire also enables a huge bundle of practical arts: carpentry with tar, smithing, glassmaking, and the alchemy of later ages. Which kind of makes the giving back of fire a good thing, at least in my book. Funnily enough, though, Prometheus stealing fire is rarely treated as an unalloyed good in other sources. Now, we're not going to talk about the good and the bad, because for Zeus, this was about as easy an answer as they come. Bad. Very, very bad. Zeus is furious and decides to not only punish Prometheus, but also, just for the sake of it, humans. His punishment has two parts: a direct punishment on Prometheus himself, we'll get to that one later, a punishment on humankind engineered by Zeus, the creation and descending of a woman, Pandora, who brings miseries into the world. On the Pandora front, Zeus commissions Hephaestus, the divine smith, to mold the woman from earth and water. The gods then bestow upon her many graces: beauty, mischievous charm, deceitful allure, and a set of gifts from which she acquires her name, Pandora. Pan meaning all, and Dora, gifted. In Hesiod's brief, efficient account, Hermes supplies the trickster aspect, language, persuasion. Aphrodite supplies beauty, Athena supplies skillful adornment, and so on and so forth. The gods literally decorate a punishment here. Zeus then gives Pandora a pithos, a large storage jar, and sends her to Epimetheus, Prometheus' hapless brother. Prometheus had warned Epimetheus not to accept any gifts from Zeus. Because remember, Prometheus is the one who thinks ahead. Epimetheus is the one who acts first and thinks later. And true to that, Epimetheus takes Pandora in anyways, and Pandora opens her jar, or just doesn't resist curiosity, and all the evils contained within, toil, sickness, strife, old age, disease, and more, escape into the world. Only hope remains in the box, or rather in the jar. Now, that's Hesiod's version, concise as an instruction manual and just as bleak in moral tone. Now, once again, you can read this story one of two ways depending on your disposition. One is the so-called consolation reading, where hope remains in the jar and thereby stays available to humans. And even though life has been filled with toil and disease, we retain hope to endure. It's pessimism with a little bright ember left in the hearth. And then there's the not-so-consolation reading. Hope not released means humans are deprived of hope. The survival of hope within the jar is itself an additional cruelty. Humanity has to live with evils but without hope. Alternatively, some thinkers see Elpis, hope, not as benign hope, but as expectation, which can be neutral or dangerous. Under that reading, keeping Elpis in the jar might protect humanity from the risks of false expectation, or conversely, keep us at the mercy of the gods' imposed ignorance. Now, Hesiod's Greek in and of itself is annoyingly ambiguous. And the ancient reception mirrors our modern split, because some read the endings consolingly, others read it as another layer of punishment. Obviously, I'm choosing the hopeful part. What is also uncomfortable but unavoidable about the Pandora myth is Hesiod's tone about women. In Works and Days, he is deeply misogynistic by modern standards. Pandora's arrival is framed as the origin of all female trouble. Hesiod actually calls women a great evil and presents Pandora as a divine trap sent to men. Safe to say that he was probably not a feminist. The story of women's original sin, which was responsible for all evil, later found its way into the Christian origin myth, wherein Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden for a little snacking. The Christian Old Testament God, like Zeus, is not to be trifled with. I wonder why they are so similar. But I digress. The story of Pandora in ancient Greece worked, in part, to justify certain social arrangements. By making a woman the vector of suffering, Hesiod gives a foundational story that naturalizes male suspicion and control over women's agency. Later readers and writers, especially after the classical period, however, have refashioned Pandora into a more complex figure, sometimes as a tragic victim of Zeus's manipulation, sometimes as an inadvertent agent of fate, sometimes as an emblem of curiosity and knowledge. Now, it's important to be honest about this. The tale serves ideological purposes in Hesiod's heads. He is not neutrally reporting origin stories. He is making a moral and social point that aligns with his broader advice about labor, family, and social orders. It's a point the authors of the Bible have learned well. Okay, back to our main story. In the versions that have most shaped Western imagination, Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound being the most vivid surviving dramatization, with Hesiod providing the structural background and later mythographers adding tidy variants, Prometheus is chained to a remote crag, usually placed at the edge of the world, where an eagle, Zeus's bird, descends daily. The eagle then eats Prometheus's liver, and because Prometheus is immortal, the liver regenerates overnight, producing a cycle of perpetual torment. This punishment is not a single execution, but an engineered eternal agony. For storytellers and audiences alike, the cruelty is the point of the story. It dramatizes divine vengeance in a way that is both literal and symbolic. Most traditions situate Prometheus's chains in the Caucasus Mountains, a wild, remote, and for Greeks, almost fantastically distant frontier at the edge of the known world, which makes the choice rhetorically almost perfect. It places the punishment beyond regular human reach, remote, bleak, and liminal. Mountains in myth often mark boundaries between ordered society and primeval otherness. Finding Prometheus there accentuates his status as an outcast from divine society. The Caucasus especially, sitting at the gateway between Europe and Asia, visually and symbolically emphasizes the exile. Prometheus is not merely punished. He is put beyond the polis, never to return. The geography, by the way, also helps later storytellers who want to stage a heroic rescue because, in some stories, Heracles' eastern adventures conveniently pass by the Caucasus on the way to other labors, where he frees Prometheus. Neither is the eagle rhamno. After all, it is Zeus's bird, a symbol of sovereignty, thunder, and divine power. Using Zeus's emblem as the agent of punishment is theatrically neat. The sovereign's emblem consumes the rebel, a potent visual of Arctoritas swallowing the scent. Now, why would the eagle go for the liver, you ask? Because, is that really the tastiest part? And modern readers expect heart or brain as the seat of feeling or thought. But for that, you need to know that in the ancient Mediterranean, the liver was culturally charged. In many Near Eastern and Greek practices, the liver was central to divination, where priests read omens from the shape and condition of sacrificed animals' livers. The liver could be read as a sign of life and destiny. Injuring it verbally or literally had symbolic force. because to damage the liver was to attack the very seat of life and prophetic power. In many animals also, the liver regenerates, which means that this myth exploits that biological resilience to turn a wound into an eternal punishment. Now, I just said a minute ago that Prometheus is eventually freed by Heracles, but this is not the only version of the story that exists. In Aeschylus' play, which is consequently Now, I just said a minute ago that Prometheus is eventually freed by Heracles, but that is not necessarily always the case because there are different readings of the story. Aeschylus' play, Prometheus Bound, ends with Prometheus, well, bound. There might be a reconciliation in later plays by Aeschylus, but still it's not as clear, and the surviving drama leaves us with splendidly unresolved suffering. Now, the story of Heracles we will explore in greater detail, obviously, but the Cliff Notes version is that Heracles visits the Caucasus during one of his labors, kills the eagle, and breaks Prometheus' chains, thereby freeing him. In yet other traditions, Prometheus might be released after offering Zeus useful prophecy, for example, the one about the risk of producing a son greater than his father, looking at you, Achilles, or after he promises Zeus that he will no longer divulge subversive secrets. The point is, there are both Prometheus suffers forever and Prometheus is rescued lines in the tradition. Now, before we close this episode, I want to go on a little side quest basically. Because if Prometheus is the mythic technician who equips humans with craft and cunning, the questions, how were humans actually made, has several competing answers in Greek tradition. Because, as we've already seen, the Greeks liked their options. Hesiod doesn't give a single plausible clay and god crafting scene in Works at Days for All Humans. Instead, he tells a chronological, moral history of humankind. 5 successive ages: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron, each representing a state of decline from a golden ease to an embattled, toil-ridden present. Hesiod was not the most optimistic of persons. In Hesiod's golden age, people lived like gods. No toil, no old age, death like a gentle sleep. They didn't need law or kingship because everything was effortlessly correct. The Silver Age was obviously inferior to the Golden. Long childhood, short adulthood, impious behavior. Zeus destroys them for impiety. The Bronze Age, then, is dominated by arms and violence. Men of bronze who are consumed by war. The Heroic Age is actually an interjection. The generation of demigods and famous heroes, for example in the Trojan War, is morally superior to the Bronze Age, but still distinct. And last but not least, the Iron Age, Hesiod's presence, cursed with labor, injustice, deceit, and diminishing piety. So in the end, Hesiod's story is not so much about how humans were made, as about why human life is conditioned by suffering and moral failure. It reads like a farmer's lament cast as cosmic history. We used to have it easier, and now you have to complain about taxes and bad weather. A very common and intuitively satisfying image, and one that later poets favored, Is Prometheus actually physically molding humans out of earth or clay? This motif fits a wide Near Eastern and Mediterranean pattern wherein gods are the makers who fashion humans like vessels. In these tellings, Prometheus shapes men and sometimes women from clay or mixed earth and water. He gives them a human form, and another god, sometimes Athena, breathes spirit into the figures or otherwise animates them. Mortality in the humans varies by version. Sometimes they are clearly mortal from the start. Sometimes divine breath is what makes them animate, but still subject to fate. Athenian vase painting and later literary sources often prefer this tactile image because it emphasizes craft and the handmade nature of human life. A nice contrast with Hesiod's emphasis on the structural consequences of Prometheus's theft. When Prometheus is a sculptor, his role is creator and benefactor. Athena frequently participates in these scenes as the divine that refines the form. She provides skill, breadth, or the finer arts of civilization. That Athena assists Prometheus is narratively neat. The Titan, whose gifts revolve around technique, gets help from the Olympian goddess of craft and civic skill. Now, Plato presents a version that is less about physical manufacture and more about functional provisioning. Here's his setup. In Plato's version, Epimetheus distributes natural traits among the animals like fur, speed, claws, leaving humans effectively naked. Prometheus then fixes the mistake by stealing fire and the arts, techne, and by arranging for humans to receive the social capacities, shame, ritual, law, necessary for living together. In Plato's telling, Zeus supplies something like the psychologically glue, shame and justice, so that the humans can be social beings rather than freelancing predators in a cave. Plato's myth separates technical capacity from moral and political capacity and suggests both sets of gifts are necessary. Prometheus supplies the means to live, Zeus supplies the means to live together. This reading is a functionalist myth. It explains institutions by way of a legend about distribution. The Roman poet Ovid folds the creation motive into his broader narrative of transformation. In the Metamorphoses, Prometheus fashions humans from clay in a vivid, tactile sense. Later, when the human race becomes corrupt, Zeus, or Jupiter, sends a flood to wash the world away. Prometheus instructs his son, Deucalion, to survive. After the flood, Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transform into people. Ovid's account thus pairs the potter image with the motive of rebirth through the flood. The clay motive becomes, in Ovid's hands, both origin and return to origin after catastrophe. The Roman poet is interested in the poignancy of making and remaking, and in the fragile cycle of human composition. Oh, and the image of a devastating flood to punish humans who had strayed from the path doth ring a bell. Where have I heard that one before? Anyways, in ritual terms, these myths explain why humans perform certain rites, why they must obey laws, and why crafts and arts are sacred. So, if we take away one lesson from the Greek multiplicity of human origins, let it be this. The Greeks always used their myths as tools to answer ethical questions, to explain social practices, to celebrate craft, and to stage political critiques. Prometheus could be the foster father of humanity's hands, the thief of fire, the rebel punished on a cliff, or the potter who kneads us from mud. Sometimes all at once. The plurality of myth is not a failing, it's the feature. Greek myth is a repertoire you can play differently depending on the tune you want to sing. And that, in all its petty glory and tragic grandeur, is the Promethean story. A family argument that becomes a policy dispute, a clever theft that becomes civilization, and a very public punishment that becomes a cautionary tale. The Greeks told it to explain why we work, why we suffer, why we make beautiful and dangerous things, and why messing with Zeus is just a really, really, really bad idea.